Trahant. Mark's going to be our next presenter. Mark is an independent journalist. He's a member of Shoshone-Bannock. He will soon be joining the faculty at the University of North Dakota and as the Charles R. Johnson Professor of Journalism. He's been a reporter on the PBS series Frontline. He's been the editor in residence at the University of Idaho. He's been a Kaiser Media Fellow, and he was recently the Atwood Chair of Journalism at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. He's a former editor of the editorial page for the Seattle Post Intelligencer, and he's got his website on TrahantReports.com and on Facebook and on Twitter. He's been doing daily updates to that for the last 10 years, and every day for the last 10 years he's been putting in a 140-character rhyme based on a daily news story online. But he's a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We want to welcome him. And thank you, Mark. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
I'm trying an experiment today. If you see the camera, it's being broadcast. One of the things that's and we'll talk a bit about technology, but one of the things that's really extraordinary is the amount of technological ability a camera has now, a cell phone. Used to take an entire satellite truck to transmit a live broadcast from an event. And here, this is out on Twitter now. And our audience just expanded significantly from people really anywhere in the world could take a peek at this. I want to thank everyone for inviting me here today, and thank my sister for organizing this and her team. I got a kick when she was showing the building from 1896 that they're moving into. I remember that building, and when the post office was there. And one day I was just walking on campus, and the superintendent said, "Come with me, I got to get the mail, I want to talk." And so we're walking in there, and we walked to the post office, and I was stunned that the superintendent had P.O. Box 1. I didn't know it existed, and I didn't know that the superintendent got P.O. Box 1. But I think it's a great metaphor for how times have changed, that box, once the power of the federal government was in that little P.O. Box 1, and now it's reflected with the tribe being the one that called the shots. And I know the tribe doesn't have P.O. Box 1, but nonetheless, that's where the decisions are being made. I'm going to throw out what I prepared this morning and kind of just go on in a couple areas, but I want to hit 3 themes that I did write. And the 3 things: something new, something old, and challenges ahead. And I want to start by talking about something new. And something new is social media. It's really new in the entire history of the world, and I'll tell you why. In some ways it's not. I have a friend that I worked with in Seattle at the newspaper who is a television writer. And when she was a kid, her entire school years, her parents and her teachers would get after her for watching so much television and say, "How can you spend all your time watching television? This is going to ruin your life. This is not going to produce anything worthwhile." And so when she became a television critic and got paid really well for watching television, she wrote back and said, "The world has changed." Many of you probably get the same or give the same speech when you're talking about social media and Facebook. Why do you spend so much time on Facebook? What are you getting out of Facebook? How is social media part of your world in a way that's going to be productive? And the fact is, it's incredibly productive. And it's changing the world in really dramatic ways that it's not a waste of time. But every time you're online doing stuff on Facebook or other social media, you're engaging in the world in a different way, one that's going to produce results down the way. I also think that social media actually is an old media. And it may be one that fits with kind of the history of Indian country. And if you think about it, for most of the world's history, stories were passed on from person to person. Somebody would hear a story, and then they would go tell somebody else about that story. And that's how it was transmission. We told the version over and over. That didn't change from the very beginning of the history of the world until about 1833. And what changed it in 1833 is suddenly they had these huge steam-run presses, and they could print one message for everybody. And that was the beginning of mass media. So from about 1833 to about 10 years ago, that was the way we got information primarily, was through this mass media. But social media is not like that. Social media is somebody sees a story that interests them, and they post it on Facebook. And they post it with their friends, and their friends post it. And that's really the difference between a hierarchy and a network. And we're returning to, for storytelling purposes, a network. So it's not producers in New York or Washington who are deciding what's important. It's people playing around on Facebook who decide what's important and what they want to know. I think, again, this is very old. My friend, the late Alfonso Ortiz, once described how Pueblo villages communicated with beams of light. And from very great distances, the lights would go on, the lights would go off. The lights would go on, and the lights would go off, and messages would be incorporated in that. That is the internet. There's nothing different about it. The internet is essentially ones and zeros, turning on and turning off. It's a very old way of communicating. The same with when Popeye sent knotted cords in 1680. It was a social media that transmitted person to person to person to person, who then expanded that message. It's no different than Facebook. So we're actually going to an older form of storytelling, and I think that's really exciting. So how is this used? How are we using social media? Well, a couple of years ago, a couple of ladies from British Columbia decided they were bored. And they were sitting around in the winter, and they were thinking about how they didn't want to be couch potatoes, and they wanted to get out and do something. And so this is in a town called Chilliwack, and one of them went and jumped in the bay. And when they jumped in the bay, they had their cell phone, and they took a picture of it, a video of it, and they posted that on Facebook. Their friend posted it back to their friend, and pretty soon it became the Winter Challenge. And it spread from across British Columbia, across Canada, across the United States, to by the time the winter was over, more than 100,000 people had either jumped in a river, rolled in snow. In parts of Alaska, the ice is so hard you can't even think about jumping in a river. Or one friend of mine jumped in a wave in Hawaii, and she said, "This is a big deal." I think it was 80 degrees. But nonetheless, that message spread throughout the world, starting from 2 people. And that is something new. And it's new that we're all connected in a way that is completely different from the entire history of the world. Let me throw out a few numbers to put this in perspective. Every day on Facebook, 1.04 billion people are signed on. You think about that, and the world's population is about 3 billion. So about 1 in 3 of the entire planet is on a daily basis on Facebook. Of that, 934 million, so slightly less, are doing that through phones and through mobile phones. And that's what's really growing, is this connectedness in that it's not just going home and turning on Facebook, but having Facebook with you all the time, or other social media. So wherever you're at, you're online. Twitter, which is smaller, reaches about 316 million people a day. And of that, 80% comes from mobile devices. YouTube, which started in 2004, has more than 1 billion users a day. And YouTube now, more than 100 hours of new video is being loaded every minute. In fact, one measurement of data is to look at exabytes. And that is just a huge amount of data. And they guess from all the libraries and all the archives and all the material around the world that there's about 2.5 exabytes of data. And that's being created every day on the internet. So if you think about the entire history of the world, it's being added to every single day. And that's by people uploading photographs, people posting, people putting things on Facebook for friends and family. All right, and this I want to ask as a question and see who's willing to be honest. How many people wake up with their cell phone? That's a pretty big crowd. No, first thing. First thing, there's that cell phone. If you're a millennial, and I know this room ranges in age, but if you're a millennial, 95%, that's the very first thing they do. More than 9 out of 10, very first thing. It's before a good morning, before anything. It's checking that cell phone. That's how ubiquitous it's become. I have a friend, when I used to work for the Hearst Corporation, we went to a series of seminars, and they brought in some people looking at the future. And here's the scary one, is they thought this connectivity, which now is on your cell phone, if you think about it, it doesn't take much more to put in a chip like we do for animals now. And that same connectivity will be in your eyes or your head. Or my point with this is only the very beginning of a technical revolution that's unlike anything the world has seen. And that's this idea of connectedness all the time, being able to share stories. And if you look at the Facebook posts and the other material from young people in Indian country, they're no different than the rest of the population in how totally engrossed and active they are in this generation. Probably more so because Indian country's population is lower, is younger than the general population. So if anything, it would skew to more activity rather than less activity. Today, the average adult is spending about 2.7 hours a day with digital media. And for young people, that number is about 5.6 hours. And that goes because from the beginning of the day, checking Facebook, seeing what's new, posting, adding to it, building it through the day. With this, I think it creates some really extraordinary opportunities for Indian country, and especially for folks in a technical field like energy. First, Indian country has a huge data gap. We need to get a lot smarter and a lot better about collecting data and being able to store and measure it. This starts with the way, and in fact, the National Congress of American Indians had a seminar recently on data, and they described us as the asterisk nation. And the asterisk nation is because there's so little data that you have to put an asterisk next to us because it doesn't count. And that's something that has to be changed. There has to be better ways of collecting information about the things we do, because in this new digital landscape, data is a valuable commodity. And your ability to have that data and to manipulate it and to be able to learn from it is extraordinarily important. And to suddenly have this big gap where we just don't know. And I'm right now spending a lot of time on elections. And one of the stories going around is about who's Indian country voting for. And there's some anecdotal evidence. For example, in Iowa, there's one reservation, and Bernie Sanders actually campaigned on that reservation. And because of that, ran up huge numbers, like 90%. But it's probably because he visited there. So then you go to Nevada, and one reservation, Walker River, actually had a really delegate-rich, because of the way the caucus system was run, they had a high number of delegates, I think 7 at stake. And so the Clinton campaign put a lot of resources into that little place and walked away with it, the 7 delegates. And so that doesn't tell us anything. How do people really vote? We need to have a good basis of who's voting, where they're voting, what their favorite ideas are, and just have some big, not the individual as much as the big picture of the data. And so that's a real challenge across the board. One of the things for, let's say, a utility that's so essential is because people are so connected to their cell phones all the time, our systems should be geared that way. We should be able to check our utility usage on our cell phone. the really advantage of an app and over any other accessing of information is that you can do it with your thumb. It just takes one press and you can get information. And so we need to gear our systems that way, so that if somebody wants to pay their bill, it's one thumb. If they want to check their usage, it's one thumb. This is how millennials think. And if it takes more steps to do it beyond that, then they stop doing it. And so we've got to start thinking through what that means for our systems. Right now, a few tribes do have apps, but they're pretty limited in scope, and they're primarily informational apps. Just to prove it to myself, I designed my own app and continue to monitor. So I'll probably go through a redesign this year to kind of see what was at stake. So the second trend is, I think if you look at history, we have had about 100 years of relatively calm elections. And by calm elections, I mean basically two parties that have argued it out and gone back and forth, and there hasn't been a lot of really dramatic change. I think we're going into an era, whether it's this year or beyond, that will bring about really dramatic change. And is something we have to be prepared for and adapted to. Right now in the Congress, in fact, I like the part about if the budget, if Congress enacts, because I think that is the key question, and the key phrase. There are really 3, maybe 4 parties in Congress right now. And that is different. That's something that hasn't been around for a while. It used to be that if someone would come to an agreement, they'd set it in stone and they'd move on, and that would be the end of it. Because there are 3 parties, they could come up with an agreement, and if one of those parties doesn't agree, then you're basically back to square one. This year's budget is a great example of that. Just before he left office, John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, came up with a grand scheme on the budget. Everybody signed off on it. It's a done deal. And then this week, the third party in Congress is trying to unravel it. And as that one party, if they hold together, that means no one else has the votes to pass it. And so you've got to go back and forth and negotiate it. And it creates all sorts of, it's why we have government shutdowns, is there's not one party to deal with, there are more than one party. And that complicates things. It's kind of curious that if you look at the cycles of history, in the 1850s, there was a party called the Know Nothing Party. And the Know Nothing Party came about, its original name was the Native American Party. And when they were first formed, they called themselves the Native Americans. And they didn't include a lot of indigenous people. Their primary cause was to eliminate immigration in the United States. And they made it a champion. In fact, almost all of their rhetoric would be really familiar today in what's going on. It's interesting, one of the, even though they were in the Native American Party officially until later, they became the American Party. One of their founders was a guy by the name of John Rollin Ridge, who was a Cherokee writer and editor, and he actually founded a newspaper that would pronounce the cause for the Know Nothings, called the California American. And this was a very tense time in the country. And here's why this matters. We like to think of elections as being a place where we go and vote, and when that vote is cast, that kind of ends the story. And that's worked again for about a century. But now, if we enter this new era, that's not necessarily the way it's going to work. For example, this election for president is very close to becoming one where there are at least 3, maybe 4 viable presidential candidates. And if there are more than 2 and somebody doesn't get a majority, does anybody know what happens to the election?
Do-over?
No do-over. The House of Representatives gets to pick. And the House of Representatives gets to pick the next president from the top 3. And in fact, throughout this country's history, that's happened. One of the most contested elections, the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, ran in 1824. and he ran against Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. There was a three-way split. Nobody had enough electoral votes to win. And John Quincy Adams ended up taking, or Henry Clay, the speaker, ended up taking fourth. And he negotiated a deal to become Secretary of State and give his votes to the winner, who took second, John Quincy Adams. And Andrew Jackson called that the corrupt bargain that ruined American politics forever. Here's another tidbit on that. Guess how many states it would take to send the election to the House? 1. If one of these third-party candidates can win one state, there's no president elected from the people. It goes to the House of Representatives. And that's a very real possibility this year, particularly either Texas or some other state that represents the third-party ideas in politics. So how does Indian country do in that? We've been through the era of termination, and the era of termination was with 2 parties running things. With 3 parties, you have to add chaos to that. And with chaos, you just don't know how it's going to come out. And I think that means we have to prepare better our own arguments and our own direction. Where this fits into energy is obviously the budget and a lot of the budget ramifications. I think we're about to have a new conversation in the country with climate change, and that conversation is going to be this: how much resources do we put into adaptation versus how much resources do we put into mitigation? Most of the resources right now has been to mitigation, how we're going to try to stop climate change or limit its impacts, but much more and much more expensive is going to be adaptation. Cities that need higher seawalls, things that need to come up with resources to protect people's lives from disease and other events that will come out of this. You're already seeing that in Alaska, where villages are being looked at for total relocation because of their proximity and sea rise. Another point that I wanted to make quickly was that this is an election to really get excited about. And aside from the presidential stuff and the complexity, by the time it's said and done, Indian country is going to have a record number of people running for the House of Representatives and state legislatures. I've been building a database of every candidate in the country, and I think by the time all the announcements are done, and it won't be until June before we get there, but we're going to have at least a dozen candidates running across the country. And some of them are just extraordinary candidates. Just next door in Montana, Denise Juneau's bid is one to watch. In Arizona, Victoria Steele is one to watch. There's going to be, and also today, if you're a Republican, a Navajo Republican announced he's running for Arizona's 1st Congressional District, Carlisle Begay. One of the interesting things about that district is it's the most Native district in the country, and it's only a matter of time till that becomes a seat that's represented by a Native American. And it could be, like I said, this election cycle. I think the growth in the state legislatures is one that's that's very interesting. We're going to hit something this cycle that I think is worth celebrating in a huge way, and that is parity. If you look across the country, and I like numbers, I've always liked numbers, but if you look across the country, in the federal judiciary, for example, there is exactly one Native American judge out of 835 Article III federal judges. That translates to 0.011%. Right now, there are 2 Native Americans in Congress out of 535, and that translates to 0.37%. With a dozen running, it may get up into the 0.5% range. We have a long way to go. But here's the good news. In Montana, Montana's population is just under 7% Native American. And in the state legislature, there are now 11 candidates running for state offices. 2 for the first time from urban areas. If those candidates are able to build on already representation in the state legislature, Montana will hit parity. First time ever that there'll be the equal number of legislators to the population base. That is really a remarkable accomplishment. And part of the reason Montanans have been paying much close attention, they've got some great organizations, and they do a great job with Get Out the Vote and some other things in Montana. But Montana is going to be the story, and partly because the idea of parity, having every bill get a hearing before people who have tribal interests at heart and can weigh it. That's just extraordinary, whether it's on energy or anything else. And that's in this cycle. I think I'm going to end by talking about data in a different way. No kid grows up thinking about numbers. We think about stories. Tell me a story are the 4 words we hear if you want to put a number on it. And that probably will never change. But I want to talk a minute about the power of numbers and the importance that it's growing. First, there's a history there that we need to celebrate, and that's the use of statistics, counts, numbers have always been a part of the way we tell stories. Whether it's been buffalo hide paintings or pictographs or any types of recorded history, the data was recorded. Then over time in the 1920s and beyond, we did the same thing with ledgers, books, computer tapes. If you remember them, floppy disks, CDs, thumb drives, and now the cloud. Today we carry more capacity for data in our phone than we've ever had in our offices or buildings. IBM, I mentioned, estimated the content of all human history is about 5 exabytes, which is 5 billion gigabytes of information. Now we produce that same amount of data every few hours. So we need more numbers. If you look at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for example, in 1900 the budget was about $8.2 million. It took 80 years for that to reach $1 billion, but it only took 4 years after that to go to $2 billion. The Obama's current request is for about 2.924. When you think about that in the context of Native youth, this is where the story and the numbers intersect. The president's budget is a great example of matching rhetoric with what's going on. He's been talking a lot about Generation Indigenous, and to make Generation Indigenous have opportunities, there has to be room for a pathway to success. Part of that is making sure that the technical skills are there to be able to prepare people. Engineers, environmental analysts, coders, all of that comes from the same discipline of the mind that involves how you use numbers. But even on any remote reservation or an Alaska village, this is the digital generation. They grew up collecting data. It's on their phones, their music, their Facebook posts, their videos, more than any generation in history. They grew up connected to Native youth. Imagine, this is the first generation that when you meet somebody, you know them forever. You're in touch with them forever. You see their posts, you see what's going on in their lives, instead of having a phone call every 3 or 4 years from someone you met. I think about the digital opportunity for young people, and you can live anywhere in the world and produce videos for YouTube. You don't have to move to a city. You can write computer code from anywhere in the world. You can live in Fort Hall, you can live in Alaska. In 1971, the Unix computer, for all of its operation, had 100,000 lines of code, 200,000 lines of code. Today, the software for a vehicle, just an ordinary car, has more than 90 million lines of code. That's a lot of jobs for people who have the right skills. And we need to be prepared to champion the opportunity, especially when it comes to the technical skills. That's why we need to make sure that this generation will prove that Facebook is not a waste of time, but a job creator. So with that, I'd be happy to answer a few questions. First, you have
we'll open it up to questions in a second.